He never saw Arthur. Arthur dropped from the pipes above the doorframe in absolute silence. Before the mercenary could even pull the trigger, Arthur's steel baton struck the side of the man's knee, shattering it instantly. As the man gasped in pain, Arthur clamped a leather-gloved hand over his mouth, wrapped his arm around the man's neck, and choked him into unconsciousness in 3 seconds. Arthur quietly lowered the heavy body to the floor. He took the mercenary's radio and clipped it to his belt. One down. 4 to go. Up in the lobby, the leader checked his radio. Echo 2, report, static. Echo 2, report. A cold, raspy voice came through the radio. Echo 2 is sleeping. You have exactly 30 seconds to walk out the front doors. If you stay, you don't leave. The leader laughed, a harsh, metallic sound through his mask. We have 20 hostages. You're a rent-a-cop in a dark basement. Come up here and die. Arthur didn't reply. Instead, he went to work. Arthur didn't just know the building. He knew the shadows. He used the maintenance tunnels, moving beneath the floorboards and behind the drywall. 2 mercenaries were guarding the rear exit. Suddenly, a high-lumen strobe light exploded from the darkness, instantly blinding their night vision goggles with searing white light. Before they could tear the goggles off, Arthur was a ghost moving through the strobe flashes. He grabbed the barrel of the first rifle, twisting it violently, breaking the man's wrist, and drove an elbow into his throat. The second mercenary swung his rifle wildly, firing blindly into the dark. Arthur slipped under the line of fire, swept the man's legs, and delivered a devastating strike to his temple with the baton. Both men hit the floor. Out cold. 3 down. The leader in the lobby was panicking. He had lost 3 elite men in less than 2 minutes, and he hadn't heard a single gunshot from the person hunting them. Regroup. The leader screamed. Bring the manager. A mercenary dragged Bradley Vance out from under the desk by his expensive tie. Bradley was weeping, begging for his life, his custom suit stained with his own tears. Please. Bradley sobbed. I have money. Take whatever you want. Just don't kill me. Shut up. The leader yelled, pressing the barrel of his rifle against Bradley's head. He yelled into the darkness. Whoever you are, show yourself right now, or I blow the manager's brains all over this marble floor. The silence in the dark lobby was suffocating. Then, a voice echoed from the shadows behind the teller counter. Calm, unbothered. I fired him 10 minutes ago. Arthur's voice floated through the dark. He's not my problem. The leader spun around, aiming his rifle at the counter. I will kill him. No, you won't, Arthur said. Before the leader could react, the heavy steel door of the vault swung open behind him, crashing into his back. Arthur had bypassed the electronic lock. The heavy metal door sent the leader flying forward. The mercenary dropped his rifle and hit the marble floor hard. Arthur stepped out of the shadows. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying, slow purpose. The last standing mercenary raised his gun, but his hands were shaking. He was looking at a ghost. Arthur threw his heavy steel baton like a spear. It struck the mercenary squarely in the chest plate, knocking the wind out of him. And before the man could recover, Arthur was on him, disarming the rifle with a brutal, twisting martial arts maneuver that shattered the man's shoulder. The lobby fell dead silent. The only sound was the distant wail of police sirens approaching. Arthur stood in the center of the dark lobby, surrounded by 5 unconscious, heavily armed mercenaries. He wasn't even breathing hard. He looked down at Bradley Vance, who was curled in a fetal position on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. You can get up now, Arthur said quietly. Your suit is getting dirty. 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of 50 police cruisers illuminated the shattered glass of the bank. The Chicago SWAT team breached the doors, laser sights cutting through the darkness. The emergency lights finally flickered back on. The SWAT officers froze. They expected a bloodbath. Instead, they found 20 terrified hostages, 5 zip-tied mercenaries stripped of their weapons, and an old security guard sitting quietly on a stool, reading a paperback history novel. Bradley Vance immediately jumped to his feet, wiping the tears and snot from his face. Seeing the police, his arrogance instantly returned. He pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. Arrest him. Bradley screamed at the SWAT officers. He's a fired employee. He probably planned this whole thing as revenge. He's a violent psychopath. Look at what he did to them. Arrest him. The heavy tactical boots of the SWAT commander echoed across the marble floor. He was a massive, scarred veteran of 20 years. He ignored Bradley completely and walked straight toward Arthur. Bradley scoffed. "Listen to me, officer. I am the regional director of this." The SWAT commander stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at Arthur's face. The commander didn't pull out handcuffs. Instead, to the absolute shock of every police officer and hostage in the room, the massive SWAT commander stood at perfect attention. He brought his hand up in a crisp, deeply respectful military salute. "Command Sergeant Major," the SWAT commander said, his voice thick with absolute reverence. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." Bradley's jaw dropped. The entire room went dead silent. Arthur slowly closed his book. He stood up and returned the salute. "At ease, Captain." "It's been a long time," Bradley stuttered, stepping forward. What is going on?" "He's a door guard. I fired him." The SWAT commander turned to Bradley. His eyes were filled with disgust. "You fired him," the commander said, his voice dangerously low. "This man is Arthur Pendleton. He spent 30 years in the United States Army Delta Force. He is one of the most decorated, lethal, and respected Tier 1 operators in American military history. He led the teams that trained my SWAT unit. He took this minimum wage job because he wanted a quiet place to read his books after retiring." The commander stepped closer to Bradley, forcing the young manager to step back in fear. "He didn't plan a robbery, you arrogant fool," the commander spat. "He just saved your miserable life with his bare hands. Show some damn respect." Bradley Vance felt the entire world collapse around him. The tellers, the VIP investors, the police officers, everyone was staring at him with absolute contempt. He looked at Arthur. The old, limping man he had treated like garbage had dismantled 5 elite mercenaries in the dark. Without a single firearm, Arthur picked up his faded blue duffel bag. He didn't look at Bradley. He didn't need to dot. He simply walked past the trembling manager, through the shattered glass doors, and out into the rainy morning. He had a book to finish, and he needed a new place to read it. The arrogant bank manager laughed as he fired the 62-year-old security guard in front of the entire lobby. He called the old man a useless relic, a glorified doorstop. What the manager didn't know was that exactly 10 minutes later, a team of heavily armed mercenaries would storm the building and take everyone hostage. And that useless old man was the only thing standing between the manager and a body bag. Bradley Vance despised weakness. At 32 years old, Bradley was the youngest regional director in the history of Apex Financial. He wore custom-tailored suits imported from Milan. His hair was perfectly styled, his teeth perfectly whitened, and his ego was as massive as the glass skyscraper he managed. Bradley believed that the world belonged to the young, the ruthless, and the wealthy. Everyone else was simply in his way. The Apex Financial headquarters in downtown Chicago was Bradley's personal kingdom. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture, acres of polished white marble, floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass, and sleek stainless steel. It was designed to intimidate, but there was one thing in the lobby that Bradley hated. His name was Arthur. Arthur was the bank's head of daytime security. He was 62 years old, with salt and pepper hair, deep wrinkles around his eyes, and a slight limp in his left leg. Arthur didn't wear a sharp suit. He wore a standard-issue, slightly faded blue security uniform. He spent his days quietly standing by the main doors, greeting customers with a polite nod, or sitting on his stool reading paperback history novels during the quiet hours. To Bradley, Arthur was a stain on the perfect aesthetic of his bank. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like the past. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Bradley finally found his excuse. The bank was hosting a VIP morning reception for a group of elite international investors. Bradley was pacing the lobby, sweating through his expensive cologne, making sure every detail was perfect. The investors arrived in a fleet of Blacktown cars. As they approached the heavy glass doors, Arthur stepped forward to open them, but his bad knee gave out for a fraction of a second. Arthur stumbled slightly, his hand slipping off the brass door handle. The lead investor had to stop and open the door himself. It was a delay of perhaps 2 seconds. But for Bradley, it was a catastrophe. The moment the investors were safely in the conference room, Bradley stormed across the marble floor toward Arthur. His face was purple with rage. "What is wrong with you?" Bradley hissed, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous lobby. Tellers and customers turned their heads to watch. Arthur stood up straight, keeping his voice calm and respectful. My apologies, Mr. Vance. My knee just locked up for a moment. It won't happen again. You're damn right it won't happen again, Bradley shouted, making sure everyone could hear his authority. Look at you. You're a dinosaur. You're slow, you're sloppy, and you're making my branch look like a retirement home. You are a glorified doorstop, Arthur. Arthur didn't flinch. He just looked at Bradley with quiet, observant eyes. I have worked here for 5 years, sir. I know this building better than anyone. I don't care if you built it yourself, Bradley sneered, stepping aggressively into Arthur's personal space. You are useless. I want your badge, your radio, and your keys on my desk in 5 minutes. You are fired. Now get out of my sight before I have you thrown out. The lobby was dead silent. Arthur looked down at the younger man. For a brief second, something dangerous flashed in Arthur's eyes, a cold, calculated stillness that made the hairs on the back of Bradley's neck stand up. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Understood, Arthur said quietly. He unclipped his radio, set it on the security desk, and slowly walked toward the basement stairs to clear out his locker. Bradley smirked, adjusting his silk tie. He turned to the terrified tellers. That is what happens when you hold back progress, he announced. Exactly 10 minutes later, progress came through the front doors. It wasn't a robbery. It was a military operation. Two black unmarked vans smashed through the security bollards outside. Before the glass doors could even close, 5 men poured into the lobby. They weren't wearing ski masks or carrying cheap pistols. They wore heavy tactical body armor, Kevlar helmets, and gas masks. They carried suppressed automatic rifles. They moved with terrifying, synchronized precision. The first man shot the ceiling, the suppressed gunfire sounding like a rapid series of violent coughs. Nobody moves. On the ground, now, the leader screamed through a voice amplifier. Panic erupted. Customers screamed. Tellers dropped to the floor, covering their heads. Bradley Vance, the ruthless, arrogant manager who ruled the bank with an iron fist, instantly broke down. All his bravado vanished in a millisecond. He let out a high-pitched scream, dropped to his knees, and scrambled under the nearest desk, sobbing uncontrollably. The mercenaries moved like a machine. Within 60 seconds, they had zip-tied the doors shut, spray-painted the security cameras blind, and dragged the screaming VIP investors out of the conference room. Down in the basement locker room, Arthur heard the muffled screams through the air vents. He was holding his faded blue duffel bag. He froze. He listened to the rhythmic, heavy footsteps vibrating through the ceiling. He recognized the pattern. That wasn't a chaotic gang. That was a tactical stack. Arthur closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, the tired, limping 62-year-old security guard was gone. His posture straightened. The slight tremor in his hands vanished, replaced by an ice-cold, mechanical stillness. Arthur unzipped the false bottom of his duffel bag. He didn't have a gun, but he had tools. He pulled out a heavy steel tactical baton, a high-lumen strobe flashlight, and a pair of heavy leather gloves. He slid the gloves on, his jaw set in stone. Upstairs, the mercenary leader was pacing the lobby. We have 5 minutes before the police set up a perimeter. Drill the vault. Watch the hostages. Suddenly, the entire building plunged into absolute darkness. The emergency backup generators didn't kick in. Arthur had severed the main relay in the basement electrical room. NVG's on. The mercenary leader shouted, dropping his night vision goggles over his eyes. Sweep the perimeter. Someone is in the basement. One of the heavily armed mercenaries moved toward the basement stairwell, his rifle raised, scanning the green-tinted darkness through his goggles. He stepped onto the first stair.